Yes, yes, ma'am, here.
Terry Stimfel, a local area resident, and I happen to be a very minor player in Sierra Club. I'm chair of a local group. My question and comment really goes to the fact that much of what we're looking at is a twofold situation: energy consumption, and energy consumption as being a component of the cost of living, of the expense, how we can grow our economy, and the other aspect of energy consumption, which is particularly important and more addressed, I guess, by Professor Andrews, is the fact that it is greenhouse gas emitting. And we are looking and listening to discussions. We listened, our second discussion talked about the consumer potentially seeing a price and recognizing the ecological and energy impact of the particular goods. We also heard a possibility of using an alternative source, wind, as one way to meet that energy demand. And it's a very good one because we do reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We heard something for a large scale, which was a large scale storage to moderate wind. But we also heard something else. We heard both in the Energy Master Plan and in the V2G some thinking that accepts our current usage of energy, whether it is fossil fuel, oils, or whether it is electricity from nuclear. We are still using it. We are not listening to something that's going to reduce our usage. For every individual, we have passive reduction, where there will be a reduction in demand because we're going to have these buildings that are more efficient. That doesn't get me to the point of using less energy. What we hear, in fact, is with V2G, I'm sorry to say, to me, it appears to actually elevate the public's view of an automobile as being something positive. It's a very unique situation that you have in Delaware, I recognize that, but it doesn't do something to the massive thinking. And our real goal is not, if it's to save money, it's because we have to reduce greenhouse gases. If we don't, it's going to cost us phenomenally high price. Likewise, when we listen to energy consumption, we hear, well, there'd be an increasing demand and an acceptance of that demand. In fact, we're not looking at alternatives and saying, what about reducing vehicle use? What about reducing long-term trucking and using and integrating concepts of mass transportation, whether it's individuals or whether it's trains for trucking in place of trucking. So I open this up very specifically. I apologize. V2G is great. It sounds wonderful, but you're really talking about 3 to 5% of a fleet being valuable as a resource for wind, whereas everything automotive becomes very positive because of that. So I'd open it up to everyone to really make a comment on, please.
Okay. We'll all whack away at this one. I think you raise a very important point about the need to focus on energy consumption and the activities that are driving that consumption. And there is a lot that we ought to be doing, and in some ways are trying to do in sort of recalibrating our desires and thinking about what is it that we really want. Is it the ability to drive, or is it the ability to travel? Is it the number of watts per square foot that I can turn on all at once in my house, or is it a nice lighting experience? And separating those is something that I think the professionals have accomplished over the last 30 years since the first oil crisis. But it's an area where there's a balance needed, because at some point we do want to be able to travel, And it's just a question of what fraction of it do we try to do by walking or by mass transit as opposed to by driving. We do want to be able to turn the lights on at night and be comfortable in our own homes. And so perhaps we can shift the balance, but I would argue that that in fact there are lots of reasons to continue to want to be able to drive. I didn't drive here today. I took the train and then I walked, but there are times when I will want to drive, and that's going to be true for everyone else. And I would not want to diminish the quality of my life to the extent of never driving again. And so how do we find that balance, and how can we shift away from the current fairly ridiculous position that we have to something more reasonable is where I think we ought to, be discussing things.
Motion?
Yes, actually I concur with you on this very important point. I also think that there has to be a balance. There has to be new ways of generating energy, but at the same time we have to put sufficient amount of emphasis on the demand response and how we actually build things. I mean, I like to again stress the idea of the manufacturing production. I mean, every kilowatt hour that you use for a product, for something that you use it in your house, for your car, and so on. And coming from the manufacturing side, there are a lot of ways that we can improve it. There are a lot of ways that we can be very cost effective and improve it. And if as government we put some incentives for this and also look into the market and how the dynamics of market works, we can really cap that demand. And what you just suggested is like, if we put more roads, we will see more cars. And I think it really goes. So the issue is how to define that the balance. But I personally think, and I personally like to see that as government and as also as a society, we look at on the demand side and see how is it that we can control it. And there are ways. Production, manufacturing is the best way of handling this problem. What we have done in the last 20, 30 years, we have basically shifted the problem from our backyard to somebody else in the world. And we have to stop that, and we have to think a little bit more holistic way and in a global way. And I think that could solve some of the problems.
Will it?
Well, it's a great question. I want to answer at a couple of different levels. Just sort of apologies for answering it to a technical level first, but then get to broader. But it's not 3% of the fleet. You gotta, if you want to really level wind, you need something like 50% of the fleet electrified and V2G capable. 3% is just that high value early market of ancillary services. But the more general question is a really important one, and I guess I have two answers to it. One is, I don't know how to get people to change their behavior. I worked on that for 30 years, as Clint knows. And I do know how to change over manufacturing, although that's very hard also. It's a lot easier. So I can only work on a couple of things at a time, and I'm working on the hardware change out part of it. But another way to answer that is we've only got 50 years, really. If we don't get major reductions in CO2 emissions in that time frame, we've caused very, very serious changes to the planet. And I would start with ocean acidification even. I think that's even worse than climate change, although climate change is going to be terrible. We'll lose 2/3 of Delaware to the ocean if we go forward. That, to me, is something we have to solve in a sort of 30 to 40 year time frame. So the vehicle fleet rolls over in 12 years. The highway system and the built infrastructure rolls over in a century. So as I see it, just because of time constants, we have to swap out the vehicle fleet while working on mass transit, built environment, and all this other stuff. But we cannot solve climate change by working on the century time constant infrastructure. We have to work on the shorter time frame stuff too.
I'll take my stab at it too.